So let's get started with the business email compromise example. Now, as I mentioned, this was an SME client of ours in the construction industry with less than 10 members of staff. And we often think of when a client has a breach that it's got an impact on their ability to trade, such as their website example. But this particular one, they weren't actually reliant upon their website to trade. They were very much reliant upon word of mouth. And that was where their revenue came from pretty much within the industry. We mentioned, as I said already, that this type of thing doesn't tend to make the press because, as you see, the ones that are very large in size versus this one, which was revenue of 1.5 million. Unfortunately, this isn't uncommon, with almost half of all UK SMEs been hit with a cyber breach in the last 12 months. This is in part due to them being viewed as low-hanging fruit in some ways for threat actors, as they don't have the same resources to protect themselves as maybe some of those larger companies. And often they form part of a supply chain into those larger entities, which for a threat actor is often a good way in to try to breach them. There's also the sad fact that some of those SMEs who are breached don't actually survive and ultimately go out of business. And this may be due to not just the initial financial impact, but other factors rather, such as reputational damage. As part of the underwriting process, we look at the security controls a client has in place. Coming to you first, James, we know clients need to be proactive in protecting themselves. In this particular example, what measures did they have in place, and are they typical for a company of their size?
Thanks, Chris. Yes, so certainly, I mean, in terms of precautions taken, the insured use email for quotes, invoices, order confirmations, general sort of communications with customers and suppliers. And to manage this safely, they rely on a managed service provider to filter out spam. And they're aware of phishing. They felt confident in spotting attacks. With no online sales and minimal digital presence beyond perhaps Trustpilot and similar, they consider themselves relatively overall a low risk in where cyber's concerned. And they'd thought about and discussed phishing, but felt relatively safe and that they'd spot an attack when it happened. Sega, before I talk about the breach, are you able to provide some examples of where our services really complement this type of company and environment?
Yeah, of course. So as the stat shows, it's very common and understandable for many small businesses to rely on managed service providers. I want to call out two services that we have seen our insureds that use MSPs leverage and the positive feedback that we've gotten about them. The first is eRisk Hub, which is an online cyber resource portal offered to all of our insureds. It's a centralized location where clients can learn, prepare, and respond with access to things like training modules, self-service risk assessments, best practice templates, and instant response playbooks. And secondly, as our insureds are working with their MSPs, looking into eRisk Hub, questions might come up. And when they do, or if they even want to run something past our experts, our team is always available for security consultations throughout their policy period at no additional cost. But with that, let me pass it back to you, James, to see what happens next in our scenario.
Certainly. So the breach. In this case, an employee in the finance team was directly targeted in a spear phishing attack and received a genuine-looking invoice as an email attachment. It had the requirement to log in to view it for security. The login actually took the member of staff to a fake but very realistic-looking login page that was actually hosted by the attacker. The user entered their details, and due to a lack of MFA, multi-factor authentication, on the user's email account, they literally gave the attacker the full details to log into their cloud-based mailbox in what is potentially a very typical type of phishing attack. The user was then provided with a relatively basic invoice appearing to be from a well-known supplier, and they realized it was a fake, closed it down, deleted it, but it didn't occur to them that this would actually have compromised their login details. They didn't think about that part. What happened after this is that the attacker gained access to and quietly monitored that email and the communications in that mailbox for several weeks. And the person whose mailbox it was didn't really think anything more of it. Basically, the attacker included a hidden copy and forward rule in the mailbox settings, and then waited for a supplier invoice or client payment instruction to come through. A reasonably large value payment instruction came through, and the attacker inserted themselves into the genuine email chain, which ended in a change of bank details on a £20,000 supplier payment. Ultimately, this resulted in the payment being sent to the attacker's account instead of the supplier's.
Thanks for that, James. So this, unfortunately, as we've said, is a very common occurrence. So we've covered here what's happened to this point. Chris Scott, coming to you now from a claims hat on, could you give us a little bit more on how that actually impacted upon the business?
Yeah, sure, Chris. So yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, we see this type of scenario very, very frequently. I mean, certainly about half the cases that we deal with on the claims side in relation to either social engineering, fraud, or business email compromise. So threat actors, who are the criminals behind the attacks, will be looking for that low-hanging fruit, as you were mentioning earlier. And it wouldn't be uncommon to see them sitting in the compromised accounts for a period of time, like James was mentioning, setting up those malicious rules. So in terms of this particular case, in terms of the policy response, there was a number of clauses engaged there to really assist the insured in dealing with the incident itself. So the policy provided cover for legal experts. They were able to assist the insured with their legal and regulatory requirements arising out of the breach itself. So that involved notification to the regulators. The law firm also assisted with the communications for the insured, which really helped minimise the impact on the insured's reputation. Policy also engaged the use of IT forensics vendors who really helped with that containment, investigation and recovery phases. So that gave the reassurance to the insured that there was no further existing threat from the threat actor, and it also helped inform those notifications required to the regulators. And then the final element of cover was for the funds loss itself. So the policy provided cover for the fraudulent transfer. So obviously we've talked a little bit there about how the policy itself responds in terms of the notification path that the insured took. So they telephoned the breach response hotline. So that's open on a 24/7 basis. Within 30 minutes of that notification call, they were put on what's called a breach response call with the experts. So that involves the breach coach, who's the law firm that we work with, one of the IT forensics panel, as well as the assigned claim professional from Travellers. From there, we all assisted in formulating the resolution strategy for the insured to tackle this incident itself. So in terms of the forensic investigation, that, like I say, helped contain the incident itself. It also confirmed that there hadn't been any exfiltration of any data from the compromised accounts. And like I say, also informed the scope of that notification to the regulators. There were very regular touch points with the insured all the way through the incident itself, really just providing them with updates on the progress of the investigation and where we were getting to. So they were typically chaired by the breach coach. I suppose final point from me is really just to reinforce on that initial breach response call. So that is complementary under the policy. We would always encourage insureds to utilise it as quickly as possible. That way we can really just formulate that resolution strategy to deal with the incident as quickly as possible. So with that, I'll pass back to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's a good overview of how the claims process works there. So thankfully, once we're through that recovery stage, what happens in the aftermath? So in this particular case, there was a full system review now carried out with the breach response team, and they implemented security upgrades, including adding multi-factor authentication, checking of email logs as part of that process going forward. The client is now at the stage where they're back up and running as normal, but they still have the process of trying to rebuild customer confidence and their reputation. There's also the often forgotten part of any breach, which is the human element, as the focus tends to be on the likes of the IT and the business disruption. But it's a very stressful time for those within the business on the front line dealing with any attack. Those responsible for IT, for example, they may feel personally responsible, even if that's not actually reasonable. And that's why we provide a unique cyber wellness service to our insureds that provides confidential counselling for insureds following a breach. Saga, just on the theme of services, in addition to that wellbeing support, what other services do we provide that can add value here?
And perfect. And yeah, I can't highlight the cyber wellbeing initiative that you mentioned, Chris. Regardless of the size of the organization, when a cyber attack occurs, the amount of time and energy spent getting out of it exhausts employees, and that's even more for smaller organizations. But going back to the scenario, one of the recommendations was implementing MFA, and we've heard from our insureds that there's complexities and questions that come up when they go through the implementation process, and that's even more for smaller organizations with smaller security teams. And that's why our team offers MFA implementation support to assist our insureds in providing direct guidance as questions come up throughout the process. And additionally, after things have calmed down from the incident, our team offers a free post-incident consultation. Really, the focus is to review what happened, controls that were in place, provide guidance, and really use the incident as a teachable moment so it helps the insured not just become whole, but stronger for the future. And with that, let me give back to you, Chris.
Yeah, excellent, Sagan. Thanks for that overview. Okay, so having gone through the breach from cradle to grave, we can see that the attack was thankfully contained quite quickly, but there are lasting consequences for their reputation and issues with their supply chain. Under our policy, we do provide full limit coverage for reputational harm, and we also provide some limited coverage for a dependent business interruption for both IT and non-IT that will cover those disruptions to our insured if a supplier of theirs cannot supply to them due to them suffering a cyber breach. We also, in a recent cyber risk wording update, widened our crime coverage for incidents like this to an any one claim basis from an aggregate. This provides that extra layer of protection should our insured suffer a repeat attack similar to this in the same policy period. Saga, just before we move on to some Q&A in this one, I just wanted to bring you back in here for a last point on the risk services and if there is anything else that we can offer to help our insureds here.
Yeah, and I would add that from our experience, when we see what our insureds go through when a claim does occur, we also look at it as a learning moment for our team, and that feeds into the services that we offer. So two I would call out. First is our continuous dark web monitoring. That gives firms comfort that if there were threat actors selling stolen credentials, for example, on the dark web, our team would notify them immediately to get ahead of any potential future incidents. We've heard positive feedback regarding this from brokers and insureds because they think of it as an extension of their security team. And in today's landscape, where it takes a lot of time, money, and energy to keep eyes everywhere. Secondly, our team can provide templates and guides for incident response plans and business continuity plans, which are key to reference whenever an incident does occur. And as I mentioned before, the eRisk Hub, that also has a huge selection of other policy templates that can help smaller organizations continue to build and enhance their security program. Now we're going to touch on this a little bit later, but just want to give a little teaser. And that's to make it all easy for all of you and your clients, a concise 2-pager that gives an overview of all of our cyber risk services is going to be included in both quotes and issued policy documents. And your underwriter can also share it with you if needed outside of that. This really helps ensure that everyone understands the added value Travelers provides, and there's no extra paperwork or separate enrollment needed. And this way, it can also help you to start having conversations with your insureds early and demonstrate that their policy is more than just coverage, but active risk reduction.